Hello, grave snatchers and church gate crashers. Actually, this one might not be for that crowd. This video is for the technical death metal fans, but maybe not the tech death you're thinking. You see, it's like the old Lionel Hutz thing. There's technical death metal and there's technical death metal. It's a subgenre that gets a lot of flack, and man, I can't say I blame people when I hear some of the positively sterile bullshit coming out today. And I mean, I'm not some knuckle dragger. I like all sorts of jazzy, hippie shit. But I think a lot of modern tech death suffers from just a sheer lack of songwriting, lack of riffs, lack of memorability, a lot of wheedly wheedly. It just sounds like a bunch of sweaty nerds practicing in a guitar center, man. I'm not going to name names, but y'all can probably immediately think of like a dozen or more bands that fit my description. So I wanted to highlight 5 technical death metal records from the 90s that get overlooked. We all know there was so much death metal coming out back in the 90s that a lot of killer shit fell through the cracks. Whether it was marketing reasons, geographic reasons, coming out too late, band member drama, I don't know, but that's the nature of the music game. Not everyone gets to be Campbell Corpse. And the bands on this list never even got to be atheist level famous, which is another band that wasn't quite as appreciated in their day as they are now. Obviously, what's considered a hidden gem is kind of subjective, but if you're into this sort of thing, I'm going to assume you probably already heard of, weirder stuff like Phlebotomize, Time Ghoul, Creep Mime, Demolic. So this list is bands that would probably open for those bands. So without further rambling, here are 5 random technical death metal gems from the 90s. All right, man. So first off is Indiana's Afterlife with their 1992 release, Surreality, a brutal technical death metal album before that particular combination of words made you think of boring ass, sterile, modern day slam. It's actually a technical death metal album that happens to be brutal. Think of it as somewhere in the area of Suffocation, first 2 albums by Gorguts. A lot of that chunkiness you hear in something like Monstrosity's first couple of records, especially like Millennium. Uh, it's kind of crazy, but there are parts, especially in the bass, that remind me of Cannibal, Butchered at Birth. But this record has a way more dynamic sonic palette. Not that I want to get into the comparison game too much, because I think this album does have memorable tunes that stand on their own. Songs like Divine Enlightenment managed to kind of seamlessly string together a lot of ideas without veering into riff salad territory, you know, mixing some doomy and melodic atmosphere in there as well. I'd almost recommend this one even to people who aren't normally fans of tech death because it's riff oriented, it's catchy, it's heavy enough that you won't feel like you're attending some sort of classical jazz seminar or anything. These guys unfortunately faded into obscurity after this one, but it's definitely one to check out. Afterlife from '92. Up next is Oppressor from Chicago with their 1994 release, Solstice of Oppression. I'm not even sure if this is a hidden gem anymore because I see it get a fair amount of praise in underground death metal circles, but I still see people call these guys a Suffocation clone occasionally, and I just don't think that's the case at all. The influence is obviously there, but I kind of think of these guys as like a Suffocation with hints of Nocturnus and Atheist, although never quite veering into the outright jazziness of Atheist. The keyboard parts and atmospheric elements are subtle and tasteful. There are a ton of spastic tempo changes, but there's a solid riff base, heavy foundation. Never really loses sight of the song. All right, so next on the list is Portugal's Thormenthor with 1994's Abstract Divinity, whereas the last 2 albums I talked about were more in the brutal headbanging territory. This is more in the nerdy vein, veering into really full-on progressive territory. Most obvious influence you'll probably pick out is Voivod. Clean vocals on this one, ripped straight out of Dimension Hatros, interspersed amongst the growls, but somehow this stuff comes off even weirder with an even even less conventional songwriting style than bands like Voivod, Separation, Coroner. The album kind of acts as like a thrashier, riffier, deathier antecedent to something like Vouvir. Vouvir. You guys know that band, Vouvir. Their 1998 Pilgrimage album. It's kind of like on the road to that. There's elements of cynic, atheist. It's definitely one you want to check out if you're into the weirder side of death metal. Staying in the prog nerd camp, we're going to take a look at Violent Dirge from Poland. Their 1995 album Craving is my favorite. But these guys only put out 2 records before disbanding in '95, and I'd also recommend their first one from '93 called Elapse. But Craving just really embraces the progginess and jazziness and weirdness even more. Uh, while there are like, innumerable bands nowadays who cite Cynic and Atheist as an influence, those guys weren't quite as big in the '90s. And this style of death metal, really took a backseat commercially, at least, to stuff like Morbid Angel, Cannibal, Obituary. Uh, it's amazing to think of all those stories of bands like Cynic and Atheist getting booed back in the day. But even still, man, you had bands who were clearly inspired by them. Some might even say Violent Dirge are a ripoff. I mean, I have seen people say that they're a ripoff of Cynic, but I don't think that does them justice because despite the similarities to Focus, Violent Dirge's Craving album, it's clearly much heavier. They just have more of a foot in the death metal door. It's crazy ass music with weird bass and keyboard parts, but it doesn't have quite as much of that kind of hippie spiritual vibe you get with Focus. So definitely check them out if that's your thing. Last one I'm going to talk about, I almost took out Profanity from Germany, their 2000 album Slaughtering Thoughts. I was wanted to talk about it because it's technical as shit and it's awesome, but I thought it was from 1999, but it turns out it's actually from 2000. So I do apologize, but I mean, 2000 is almost the 90s. And just to make up for my horrible mistake, I'm going to throw in their less overtly technical, but still pretty fucking complex 1997 debut, Shadows to Fall. Coming off all the proggy shit I just talked about, we're back to brutal headbanging territory. There's even some thrashy undercurrents here that really help act as kind of an anchor of catchiness beneath all the busyness and complexity going on. It's a band that nobody seems to really talk about anymore at all. But I'm going to recommend both these records. So that puts you at 6. So I'm kind of giving you a little more here. Especially Slaughtering Thoughts. Super chunky, over the top technical, without really forcing it in your face in a way that would distract you or sacrifice the heaviness and the riffs. All right, so that's just a handful of random old school technical death metal albums that I dig, and I don't see them talked about a whole lot. Obviously, there's a million more I could talk about. This is not a comprehensive list or a top 5 of all time or anything. I mean, I almost included the second Cenotaph album, Riding Our Black Oceans, which is, more on the melodic, atmospheric side of things. But then I was like, well, is that a hidden gem? Is that fully tech death? I don't know. I don't know. So, I mean, technical death metal covers a wide, wide umbrella. So there's a ton of stuff out there. So as always, feel free to leave comments on the albums covered, recommend some albums to check out. I'll leave the names of the bands and albums in the description so you can check them all out on Metal Archives, look them up on YouTube, track down the CDs, that whole thing. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you.